Everyone, let us have an introduction on what is called software license. Software license is a legal instrument governing the usage of redistribution of software. We are making use of many kinds of softwares daily, and there are many softwares which are coming under a license, a legal instrument by from part of the government. A typical software license grants an end user permission to use one or more copies of software in ways where such a use would otherwise constitute copyright infringement of the software owner's exclusive rights under copyright law. So, here, what do we actually mean by infringement? Infringement refers to the violation of the rules and regulations regarding the copyright of a content, especially with regard to software. Here, a typical software license grants an end user, so users like one of us, each one of us, the permission to use one or more copies of software in ways so where there won't be any kind of violation of the rights of the copyrights of a software. So here in this concern, we have something called OEM, Original Equipment Manufacturer Software, which actually releases a license, OEM license. So they are actually third-party software licenses. And OEM software refers to a phrase that refers to a software that is sold to computer manufacturers, original equipment manufacturers in large quantities for the purpose of bundling with computer softwares. So, an example for an OEM software as a reference to third party softwares could be those softwares which are released along with printers or your mobile cameras or or any other peripheral devices attached to a computer. There are some categories under software licensing. Software license can generally be categorized as proprietary licenses. An example for a proprietary license could be those softwares released by Microsoft Corporation, especially their operating system known as Microsoft Windows operating system is coming under proprietary licenses. And the other kind of software license is a reference to free and open source licenses. So it consists of free software licenses as well as open source licenses. Now, let us try to understand what are proprietary licenses. Proprietary licenses include operating systems which keep up copyright rules and regulations, and also those operating systems which are under copyright laws. So, for example, we have referred to Microsoft Windows operating system. So, it's actually owned by a copyright owner, Microsoft Corporation itself, and who can exercise control over what users can do with the software. So, there are some limitations, restrictions for the free redistribution of the software. The term is commonly used in a narrower sense to describe software with restrictions on use or private modifications, or with restrictions judged to be excessive on copying or publishing of modified or unmodified versions. So we try to understand the proprietary licenses, which are licenses that cannot be freely distributed or redistributed to colleagues or friends. In India, we have actually a tradition of making use of pirated editions, versions of proprietary licensed softwares. And it's actually something called an infringement of law, the violation of copyrights. And at any time, there's a possibility of imprisonment, those who violate proprietary licenses. Now, the next category is free and open source software. So we are familiar with the Linux platform operating systems. Those softwares used in Linux operating systems in itself, the operating system itself are actually coming under this section called free and open source softwares. Here we have some classifications like force and flows. Okay, so force actually refers to free and open source software, and flows refers to free, libre, open source software. Here, free and open source softwares are actually references to softwares which are liberally licensed to grant the right of users to use, study, change, and improve its design through the availability of its source code. So we are all familiar with the release of the source codes of free and open source operating systems, and the bundles of softwares released with it. Free is intended to refer to the freedom to copy and reuse the software rather than the price of the software. So, in many open source softwares, there is a freedom for the end user to edit it in a number of ways that is possible. So let me just explain some technical terms here: force, flows, and course. So force, of course, refers to free and open source software. Flows is actually reference to free, libre, open source software. The word libre refers to freedom that has been given to the end user. And that is another technical term coming under this head, under free and open source software, is CORS, COSS. CORS refers to commercial open source software. So it is perhaps a new thing amidst the free and open source software. So there are also commercial productions under open source softwares. Now, what is technically called free software license? Let me read from the slide. Free software license, in contrast to proprietary software license, ownership of a particular copy of the software does not remain with the software publisher. Okay, so in proprietary software licenses, the ownership very often remains with the publisher of the software. But in a free software license, say it goes to the end users. A free software license typically grants to the end user extra rights which would otherwise be reserved by the software publisher. So this is one difference with the free software license and proprietary software license. Now, free is again different from all open source license. It is a copyright license for computer software that makes the source code available under terms that allow for modification and redistribution without having to pay the original author. Say in an open source software license, so there is a copyright license for computer software, and the source codes can be made available for its uses, and it also allows the modification and redistribution without having to pay anything to the original author. So it's because the software remains under open source system. One popular set of open source licenses are those approved by the Open Source Initiative, technically called OSI, based on their open source definition. So there are some categories under open source licenses. Say categories like copyleft licenses as well as permissive licenses. Let's try to understand copyleft licenses. Copyleft software license refers to, as an example given here, GNU New General Public License. This license is aimed at giving the end user significant permission. So the end user is not allowed to reassert the removed copyright restrictions back over their derivative work. Okay, so here in this text say the end user is not allowed to reassert the removed copyright restrictions back over to their derivative work. So, so this is actually aimed at giving the end user some permissions. So, copyleft license is actually an example for open source software system. So, and the example given here is a general public license. Now, let us also try to understand what is the permissive free software license. Examples for permissive free software license are Berkeley Software Distribution License and Massachusetts Institute of Technology have also got a license. These two examples, BSD as well as MIT licenses, remain as examples for permissive free software license. In this section, the publisher actually grant the end user permission to do anything they wish with the source code in question, including the right to take the code and use it as part of a closed source software or software released under a proprietary software license. So here there is a permission given to the end user to do anything with the source code. But whereas in copyleft licenses, say it also gives the end user some significant permission, but the end user is not allowed to reassert the removed copyright restrictions. So this is one difference that we find with the copyleft license as well as permissive free software license. Now let us wind up the session on free software license or software license in general. A software license, let me reassert, is a legal instrument governing the use or redistribution of software. So under United States copyright law, all software is copyright protected, either in source code as also object code form. So a typical software license grants the licensee, typically an end user, permission to use one or more copies of software in ways where such a use would otherwise potentially constitute copyright infringement of the software on its exclusive rights under copyright law. So let me recapitulate the major ideas that we have seen in the session on software license. So this section on software license concentrates on different kinds of licenses. The first kind of license is actually a reference from OEM, Original Equipment Manufacturer license given to third-party softwares. And also free and open source softwares are there. And under these major heads, we have proprietary uh, licenses like the softwares released by Microsoft Corporation, and also free and open source licenses. Okay, examples could be reference to new general public licenses. And we have a category called copyleft licenses and permissive licenses. Copyleft Copyleft licenses aim to preserve the freedom and openness of the software. This is very significant with regard to copyleft licenses. Whereas permissive licenses aim to give freedom to the users of the software for its redistribution. Okay, so these softwares, both copyleft free software license as well as permissive free software licenses, come under open source software licenses. Thank you very much for your kind listening.